Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this information session on the Human Rights Master Program at the Catholic University of America. This information session is sponsored by the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America. The Institute for Human Ecology is the nation's leading academic institute committed to increasing understanding of the economic, cultural, and social conditions that are vital for human flourishing. Drawing on the Catholic intellectual tradition, the mission of the Institute is to educate students, sponsor multidisciplinary and social scientific research, advise church leadership and policymakers, and to organize symposia, conferences, and lectures for the academy and also the public square. IHE programs challenge the deterministic and reductive institutions and arguments that thwart the pursuit of greater freedom and prosperity for all. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jennifer Frey, and I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of South Carolina, and I'm also a faculty fellow of the Institute for Human Ecology. And this evening, I am joined by Bill Saunders. Bill is a religious liberty and human rights scholar at the Catholic University of America. He is law fellow with the Institute for Human Ecology. He is professor and director of the program in human rights in the School of Arts and Sciences, and he's co-director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Columbus School of Law. He is chair of the Religious Liberties Practice Group of the Federalist Society. Before joining the Catholic University of America, he served as senior vice president and senior counsel with Americans United for Life. And from 1999 to 2009, he was senior fellow in bioethics and human rights counsel at the Family Research Council. He attended the University of North Carolina, and he obtained his law degree from Harvard. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Very glad to be here, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. It's my pleasure. So we're here tonight to talk about the purpose of the MA program in human rights. So we're going to go over the curriculum and admission requirements, and we're also going to answer any questions that prospective students might have about the program. This is just going to be kind of an informal conversation about the program, but eventually we're going to turn it over to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A chat button, which is just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And about midpoint through the hour, I'm going to check into the chat and see what's there and start to answer your questions. And my last kind of programmatic note is just to say that this video is being recorded and is going to be made available on the IHE website following the conversation. Okay, so Bill, I want to start with you tonight because actually we've never met, and I'm just really curious about your personal experience studying and advocating for human rights over the course of your long career. And I'm just really curious to hear how that experience led you to this current project as director of an MA program in human rights from a distinctively Catholic perspective.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that, because I'm doing what I do because of the experiences I've had. Sometimes people ask me, how to figure out what they're going to do in life, and I always tell them my experience is you never see it in prospect, you only see it in retrospect. But if you give it to the Holy Spirit and you trust it, even though it's difficult a lot of times, if you can do that, it'll eventually make sense when you look back at it. So I've had things in my life that at the time I didn't understand how they all tied together, but I did see it eventually, and it became pretty clear that it was what I had been called to do as a person was to work on human rights issues. It's interesting because in our program on human rights, sometimes I say the two main influences in a certain sense are John Paul II and Mother Teresa. And I'm a convert to Catholicism, and I came into the church under the pontificate of JP2. And I was so heavily influenced by what he wrote and how he approached the subject of human rights, which many people particularly people who are traditional or religious or whatever, they kind of dismiss it, but because they see it as a disguise for a ideological project of the left, but that's not the case. And John Paul II just, human rights are just another way of articulating the basic truth about the dignity of the human person, our community of with others, that our obligations to the common good, our obligations in solidarity, etc. It's just it's like the lingua franca of our age is human rights, and people are interested in human rights, and certainly the Catholic Church has a lot to say about human rights. So in my very long career, I noticed that there were very bad arguments being made about human rights, very unconvincing arguments, and I just became convinced that if we could learn to approach the subject through the benefit of Catholic social thought, that we could make a real contribution. So when I first began this journey of mine, John Paul II was the Pope, and I was working at a human rights organization. And while I was working at this human rights organization, I noticed several things. One thing was that although the people I worked with were good, decent people, they didn't much value personally religious faith and the right to religious freedom, which is guaranteed in all the human rights documents. So whenever somebody came into their office that had something to do with religion, they would come my way, and I was very happy, because I was, and still am, do believe, I'm a Roman Catholic, and I'm very strongly believe in God, and I think that the right to follow God is kind of the fundamental freedom. I think John Paul II called it the first freedom. So anyway, when I was working in this human rights organization, one day a Roman Catholic bishop came in from Sudan, and he was in America trying to raise the alarm about Islamic fundamentalism and what was being done to his people. And what was being done was genocide. In fact, this poster here is a film that we did. The bishop area was being bombed, and there were also people being taken in slavery, and it was an acute human rights violation that nobody was paying much attention to. So I started a nonprofit to work with that bishop, and through that I met people in Hollywood who were very interested in this too, Catholics and then we made a film, and this film is at the Holocaust Museum. It's also, it's called The Hidden Gift. It's also, we went in and we made documentary footage of people who had been enslaved and who had escaped from slavery. And that footage is archived at the Museum of Intolerance in Los Angeles. I was gonna say it's very moving, but it's unforgettable. Too, when you encounter people who have had that level of suffering. I want to show you this, which is a cross, that crucifix that the bishop gave to me. So we went in, it was a civil war. We went in illegally over the border from Kenya. We took in relief supplies and various kinds of things. But what was the most moving thing of all was to be there at Christmas or Easter. So we're on the cusp of Easter, right? Tomorrow's Holy Thursday. Well, I was in the Nuba Mountains once for Holy Thursday and the whole Triduum, and people who whose existence is literally on the edge. And they're, when we had mass, they were, they sent bombers. But so this is bombers in the sense not of supersonic jets, but bombers that push these barrel bombs out that explode and then shoot shrapnel at about waist level for a mile. So to maim people. Anyway, they didn't find us, but so we celebrated mass, but the experience of being with people, in that situation, it really drives home the importance of human rights and what it means to stand up for the dignity of the most marginalized people on earth. So that obviously had a huge impact on me. It still does. And I went on from that into work, and particularly in bioethics and pro-life issues. And to me, it's exactly the same principle. The genocide of the Nuba people was wrong because they were killing innocent people. And these other things are just as wrong because they kill innocent people. I mean, I don't have a theological degree, but I know that, again, with the Triduum, we all know Christ died for each one of us. So we all have this great dignity. So I just think it's a very important work if you're called to do it. And if you're called to do it and I can help you learn how to do it, I want to do that.
Thank you. I mean, what's really interesting to me about your story is that, it seems like for a long time you're in a very practical, I mean, practical almost sounds like the wrong word because I don't know, very, very hands-on human rights work. And that's obviously incredibly important and life-saving. And now you are director of a graduate program in human rights, an MA program, where, I'm assuming that you're looking mostly at the theories behind it, but maybe I shouldn't assume. So maybe you can say why that transition is so important for you, like why a graduate program in human rights? How is that going to help?
Well, I mean, just in my own situation, kind of all along, I've also always been writing a lot, and I've done a lot of work in collaboration with people that you will know, and I think people listening will know, like Robert George and other people. We've written a lot of things together. And so I've contributed always had an academic, I don't know if that's the right word, but I've had something beyond just the kind of hands-on stuff. I suppose I just mentioned real briefly that this is a book that, in fact, it kind of underlines what we're saying. It's called Unborn Human Life and Fundamental Rights. And it's a book that I'm co-editor with a professor in Spain, and I have an essay in here. Gerard Bradley from Notre Dame has an essay in here. We have professors from Latin America and from Europe in here, like Bill Benchy from Ireland, the great human rights lawyer. And I have to say, I'm proud to say we have a concluding essay by John Finnis. So I've always been interested in that, the kind of careful thinking about these things. I've also been, an intense student of John Paul II, and I was involved in, just kind of providentially or luckily, I was involved in some things like the Ramsey Colloquium with Richard John Newhouse, who was the founder of First Things. So I've always kind of, in a sense, had a foot, I guess, in both worlds. But I think, my experience of being involved in these public conversations is that they're poorly done. They're poorly conducted. And sometimes, of course, that's because some of the participants are not in good faith. But even when they're in good faith, sometimes they're poorly done. And so as I said a minute ago, I think if you ask, 100 people just walking down the street, do they believe in human rights? Probably 99 would say yes. So the whole issue for our culture and the world's culture is, what do we mean by human rights? And my experience, so I'm a lawyer, so I know the law on human rights, and I know that it's very providential that the Second World War led to the issuance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in fact, in a lot of this, I follow in the footsteps, I'm proud to say, of Mary Ann Glendon from Harvard Law School. And Professor Glendon and Professor George are also on my advisory board for this program. So there's this wonderful document that was issued after the Second World War, and it's the rights it articulates are very right in accord with Catholic thought, but it doesn't articulate the kind of unifying theory of human rights. And so John Paul II and myself and Professor Glendon and Professor George, we think that a proper understanding of human rights is actually best supplied from the Catholic tradition, not catechetical, not seeking conversions, but that the deep thought of Catholic social thought does help us to really understand and pull together human rights. So our program is when we say kind of from the distinctly Catholic point of view, that's what we mean. Catholic social thought is we use that as the unifying principle in human rights. And the program is interdisciplinary. So this is a great thing about the Institute for Human Ecology, as Jennifer, is we have all these wonderful professors who are fellows from on campus and off campus. I mean, for people at Catholic University and others. So some of our classes are taught by, wonderful philosophers like Bradley Lewis, or wonderful political thinkers like David Walsh, etc. So what we wanted to do was bring together these wonderful perspectives: philosophy, law, theology, political science, and we even have a canon law course in religious liberty, and just take a fully Catholic perspective on human rights. And so this is a long answer to your question, but the reason I'm in the academy now doing this is I've been in the quote real world doing it for a long time, and I think what we need are people properly formed in the Catholic understanding of human rights who can take that understanding into the public conversation and enrich that conversation.
Good, yeah. Well, let's talk about the curriculum, right? So let's talk about, I mean, you mentioned some of the faculty, and you've talked about the need for a theoretical foundation for doing practical work in human rights. But if I'm on board so far, right, I still want to be able to envision like what really is my coursework like? Is it mostly graduate seminars? Will I write an MA thesis? Wondered if you could talk about the program at the level of curriculum and requirements.
Well, yes, because it's interdisciplinary, there are different requirements between the schools, and we do take at least one law class. Sometimes this year the students are actually taking 3. And the reason for that is that sometimes one of our professors might be on sabbatical or something like that. So, we have a kind of a core curriculum. We have a core curriculum, but we have to sometimes adjust it one way or the other. And this semester, the students are getting, I think, a great opportunity to take constitutional excuse me, constitutional law with Mark Rienzi, who is a full professor in the law school and president of the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. So, so the kind of requirements, yes, it's graduate level work. You know, there's a lot of papers that are written. There's a lot of reading to be done. It varies by professor. And there's the law school kind of thing, but we're not treated like laws. I mean, we're part of those classes, but you don't have to be worried if you say, oh, I'm afraid to go or not interested in going to law school. We are, as part of interdisciplinary arrangements, taking these classes, but we're being graded, you know, not as a full-time law student. So it's an advantage, not a disadvantage. But then I teach a capstone course, which intends to draw everything together. And I want to say, one of the great things about this capstone course is I'm teaching it with a Monsignor, Anthony Frontero, who used to be a full-time diplomat for the Vatican. And our capstone course particularly looks at the Holy See's work in international arenas. And again, just a side story, but Monsignor Frontero and I was on a Bush administration delegation to the UN, and Monsignor Frontero was on the Holy See delegation. We actually worked together on a couple of things at the UN. So, so we, you know, look at, as I say, kind of the international part in the capstone class. And the students do write a long paper. It's not technically a thesis, but it's a long paper and, you know, pretty demanding paper. But let me tell you a couple other things at the curriculum. So it's a pretty demanding thing because the first semester you have 5 courses, the second semester you have 5 courses. One of the great things about this program for busy people is they can complete it in 1 year. You know, usually a master's program takes 2 years, but you can, not only can you complete it, that's the intent. So we bring you in as a cohort of people who get to know each other. You take your classes together. The professors get to know you. You know, you support one another. We all support one another in this program. So the first semester is all core courses. The second semester, though, you have the capstone course, and you also take an elective for credit. So when I bring people here to Washington in August, before we start the program, as part of the orientation, we introduce them to some people doing human rights work. And then throughout the fall, we have a kind of additional, not really course, but meeting where we meet once a week with somebody who does human rights work. The purpose of that is to help the students start to think about what do I want to do with a human rights degree. And of course, you can't do that unless you know what your options are. So we bring in a lot of different people. They get to hear about a lot of different things. They get to start, you know, I mean, I could just say in my own life, you know, something clicks in your mind and it, you know, when I met this bishop, I mean, in a way it changed my whole life. You know, like I said, I couldn't have seen that in prospect. So you've got to be in the middle of these things. So I want the students to hear from a lot of people, start to think about how people do human rights, start to kind of network in the sense of knowing somebody who does this. For instance, we have people who come in who work against human trafficking. And I could easily imagine a student coming who didn't even realize there were organizations that do that. And then they hear from this person, they're interested in the organization. In the second semester, they take an internship for credit. So it's you know, it's graduate credit. So it's, you know, it's not a meaningless thing. And you learn about how does that organization do what it does? And you meet other people working that way, and you just start to, I think sparks start to fly, you know, or the Holy Spirit starts to fly around, and you know, something will click, it clicks in your mind. So the curriculum is kind of very much 5 courses in the fall that you all take together, plus these evenings once a week where we get together with a human rights practitioner. And then in the spring, you take a couple of required courses, the Capstone Course, an internship for credit, and then usually the student has an elective that they can take, if they have a particular interest, like I have a student that's particularly interested in immigration issues, they're taking something, and another student's interested in something else. So that's the curriculum.
Yeah, so it sounds like most of the classes are sort of in philosophy, theology, law, and then you have this kind of practical you have this sort of practical element to it, but it's not so much in your coursework. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yes, that's true. Yes, most of the classes are theoretical in the sense of, philosophical or theological point of view. The practical part comes from the people you meet in the fall, the internship you do in the spring, and of course, I'm always available to and talking to the students. And the people who come in and talk to us in the fall are usually friends of mine that I've made through my extremely long career. And so they're generous with their time. If a student gets kind of interested in something and wants to follow up with somebody we had come in, they can do that. So I think those are where the practical opportunities are.
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine, being based in DC is an incredibly valuable aspect of the program. But I just want to invite you to talk a little bit about what you think the professional advantages this program offers. So I think there are tons of advantages that I can imagine just being at CUA in terms of having an intellectual community, and then of course being in DC where you're so plugged into political life generally. But what about internal to the program? What do you think the professional advantages are?
Yeah, I will say a word about that, but I just want to reaffirm what you just said. I mean, one of the great advantages of the program is being in DC. Another great advantage, because the whole national, so there's all the national government level. So people who don't live in DC, you're aware of the Congress, obviously, and the U.S. government. But something you may not be aware of is that most non-governmental organizations have offices, if not headquarters, here. So people working against human trafficking are going to have an office here. People working to help refugees are going to have an office here, etc. So it's a great opportunity to see and think about where you might fit into that world. And Catholic U at university itself is a great place. We have a great president, John Garvey, a great provost, and Aaron Dominguez, who's very strong support. Both of whom are very strong supporters of this program. The Institute for Human Ecology itself is wonderful and has all kinds of events all the time. Jennifer's been on some of the events we've done virtually, where we talked about various things, from the meaning of a Catholic university to how to respond to some of the COVID issues and things like that. So as part of the program, you get really involved in the Institute and get to meet people and learn from people. In terms of the professional advantages, I think one advantage of this degree is that it's very versatile. You could go to work for the Red Cross, you could go to work for Catholic Charities, you could go to work for the U.S. Bishops' Conference, or your senator, or your congressman, or a committee on the Hill, or the Department of State, or the Department of Education, or whatever. And I think a lot of people go to law school. I'm a lawyer. I can't talk down lawyers. But law. So this isn't a law degree, but next to a law degree, I think it's very flexible, and it can be done in 1 year. I think, I believe even, so this isn't, in my opinion, just a public policy degree. I think if you're sitting there listening to this and you think, you know what I want to do, but I don't want to do it this year, but in a year or two, I want to go to work for, I don't know, Fortune 500 company. And, but I'm very interested in human rights. Is this relevant? I think it's highly relevant because those companies, they're multinational companies. Think of Walmart, for instance, or any other big company. They're thinking internally. What, you know, we have, just as an example, you know, we have offices in Nicaragua or Costa Rica or Argentina or, you know, Lithuania or Africa, you know, so we want to be socially responsible. What does that mean? There's going to be a lot of internal discussions. And I think if you're equipped with what this degree brings to you, you will be able to bring very insightful contribution to that conversation. So that's the advantages I think it gives people. And, you know, the networking should not be undervalued. Just being connected to people who do these kind of things gives great potential.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously this program is new, and so you don't have, you know, decades of students to draw upon. But when you were, you know, when you were envisioning this program and making it a reality, what was kind of your vision of an ideal candidate for a program, for this program? Like, who do you think? Yeah, I mean, who do you envision this serving?
Well, I think that somebody who is kind of strongly committed to their faith, Catholic faith, although you don't have to be a Catholic to be in the program, but I've had students who are not, but somebody who's not ideal, but what I would think of as a student, somebody who's very interested in Catholic, in their Catholic faith. They're thinking about, they know there's a lot of problems in the world. They're also frustrated by the level of conversation about these problems. They're aware, maybe, that there were these great figures, because they're going to be a lot younger than me, so maybe they're not, you know, these great figures like John Paul II and Mother Teresa, who made a big difference in the world. They're aware that human rights, you know, they're in favor of human rights, but they don't quite know what they are. But so that kind of person, they want to make a difference in the world. We have had, you know, like you say, just a few students so far through the program. This is only our second year. But one of our students last year did go on to a PhD program, but that's not what I envision the typical student would do. It would be that they take an intense year to delve into human rights from the Catholic perspective and then go work in the world. If I can just say one thing, because I want to make sure I do, Jennifer, before we go to the next questions, I want to show people. So this is the patroness of our program. And if you don't know who she is, anyway, Saint Bakita, and she's Sudanese, and she's a saint. But before she was a saint, she was a slave. And you know, when I went to Sudan, you know, she was canonized in the year 2000, and I was actually in Rome for that canonization, which is you know, unforgettable. It was the same day as Mother Catherine Drexel was canonized and the Chinese martyrs were canonized. But anyway, it was unforgettable. But when I was there in Sudan, so before she was canonized, she was called Blessed Bakita. So I still think of her as Blessed Bakita, because she had been, you know, recognized as blessed in the church, but not yet canonized. And she's the patroness of our program. So we are under her patronage. And we begin every class by prayer to her because she, suffered the worst. I mean, we're talking chattel slavery, kidnapped from your parents, taken as a child, sold to somebody who treats you worse than the worst animal. Yet, you end up, believe it or not, in Italy, you forgive the people who did it to you, and you become a saint. So, we can all benefit from her protection. But I want to mention her because she's also, and we had her feast day recently. She's kind of the patroness in the world against human trafficking. So people are interested in that issue, but Kita, you will often hear of her. So I maybe got us off a little bit, but I didn't want to not mention her.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, it ties back into your experience in Sudan. I love it. So I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A. So I will just remind people that if you have questions for us, I've been checking the Q&A chat. So please just drop your questions in there. And I'll get to them as soon as I see some, but until I see some, I'll just keep asking the questions that I have.
Sure.
And, really, I just would like to invite you to say more about the Capstone class. So I'm assuming you're teaching it now because it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are you guys reading? What are you doing? And
well, it's obviously we all, we're all under the COVID year, and that's disrupted some of the things we do. So usually in the fall, Robert George will be here in Washington and my students and I will meet with him. But since he couldn't do that in the fall, he is just last Friday, he taught part of my class, and he taught it from a long paper he wrote about human rights. And our next class is going to be, I'm going to talk some about the work I did in Sudan, and we're going to have a man who talked about what he's doing for human rights in a country that many people won't have heard about called West Papua. And why will I, you can imagine why Professor George, he's one of the great thinkers of our time, and he's served in, president of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and other things like that. So he's very experienced in human rights. But I'm having the other gentleman come in because, again, God pricked his heart. He came upon an injustice. He felt called to do something about it. He set up a human rights organization. He set up a web page. He's going to walk us through that web page. I want the students to understand what's involved in getting involved in human rights. There's 100,000 ways to be involved in human rights. There's no one way. It's really what you're called to do, and you discover that call. So in addition to that, for instance, in one of the classes, we did a very close read of Evangelium Vitae. Another one, we have Redemptor Hominis, which was John Paul II's first encyclical. And it was the one in which, and this is back in 1979, where he began to talk about human rights. And he began to talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And he began to see it in a positive way as a kind of a grammar by which we could speak to one another and discover deeper truths and build and participate in, more just societies. Monsignor Frontero, in the upcoming classes, we're going to study some of the things he wrote as a diplomat on behalf of the Holy See. We studied one of the most important developments in certainly in the last 30 years was what was called the Cairo Conference on Population and Development, which took place in 1994, and it was a big moment for the world because certain countries were pushing very hard to have abortion made a human right, which it can't be, and it isn't, because it negates if you don't have the right to life, you don't have any rights, because a powerful person can take them away. So they were some countries trying to make that the human right, but the Holy See, the Catholic Church, along with some Muslim countries and some Latin American countries, fought it, and it did not become it was not recognized as a human right in '94. And so we've had several courses where we've looked at the development of kind of the law and the politics since then. But as part of one of those classes, we did a careful read of the Cairo document on population development, which is about 104 or 215 pages of just so the students can understand, if you participate in human rights at the international level, what does it mean? I mean, I was a delegate at one of these things, so we help them to understand literally, how does the diplomatic process work? What are you looking at? And we look at an important historical document. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, some of the stuff we study.
Okay, so I have a question now from an attendee. So the question is it possible for a course or two to be taken online without officially being in the program?
At this point, no. So at this point, no, but I would say COVID, has changed everything. It may be that that will change, but it's an in-person program. Like I said, we form a cohort of 5, 6, 7, or 8 students, kind of something in that range, who get to know each other. So it's not an online program, it's really an in-person program. We do have you can be part-time, but you have to be in DC, because even your part-time courses, as a general matter, you've got to take on campus. But there's been a lot of interest in people in doing that. So we didn't do that the first year. There's a lot of interest in it this year, so we're going to try it next year So if people who are here in DC are interested in doing it part-time, you can do that. You would take probably 2 courses a semester, something like that.
Okay, so that's good, because actually that was going to be my next question, and is also the next question in the chat. So just to clarify what you just said, it's possible to go at a slower pace, to be part-time. So would the idea then be it takes 2 years, or possibly even 3 years?
Yeah. Excuse me. It could take, frankly, it can take longer than 2 years. You just kind of have to work it out with me. But if you do part-time, you couldn't, if you only took 2 courses a semester, it would take more than 2 years. So, because that would be, you can't take them in summertime, so you got to take them in fall and spring. So if you took 2 and 2 and 2 and 2, that's only going to give you 8. You still need 2 more.
Right.
So, but if you one semester you took 3 classes, so I would say a minimum probably of 2 years to complete the program if you went part-time. But it could be longer. You have to take 1 course every semester, and you can't skip semesters. So, it's possible even to take as much as 5 years if you took 1 course in the fall, 1 in the spring for 5 years. That would be the 10 courses.
Right. Yeah. And then so then it is possible, if you work, you're a working professional, to still do this program, just at a slower. Yeah. That's good. That's interesting.
Some employers would like that, probably. They might even help pay for it. And a lot of times, at least in DC, when you get a graduate degree, you use it to kind of to enhance your self within your current work. So yeah, we'll have that available next fall.
Okay. Awesome. Another kind of nuts and bolts question, and that is just like, suppose that I want to apply, whether I want to apply full-time or part-time, what are the actual requirements for applying?
Well, first, go to the webpage, which is MA, like Master of Arts, mahumanrights.com, which lists everything, but you have to have 3 letters of recommendation, your transcripts, you have to have a statement of purpose as to why you want to be in the program, other things. I don't remember all the actual requirements, but those are some of them. They're all on the webpage.
Okay, great. And maybe we can drop the webpage in there we go. Yes, thank you. And related to that, I mean, when is the deadline for next year? Is it over the summer
Well, it depends. Well, you can tell I'm a lawyer because there's no simple answers. It's all complicated.
I'm a philosopher, so it's
yeah,
fine.
Exactly. Yeah. So the deadlines are midsummer. If you're thinking about going full-time, and you're looking for any kind of scholarship help, the sooner the better, because we have limited scholarship funds. They're partial merit-based scholarships, and the sooner the better. I mean, literally, the sooner the better, like within the next couple of weeks or something. If you don't need scholarship help, you can apply full-time even up to midsummer, but the scholarship funds will be committed before then.
Okay, yeah. So can you say more about the scholarships? And then I thought I saw something about maybe a discounted rate
Yeah,
over other graduate programs at CUA. Like maybe you could just say more about those two things.
yeah. So we have a great discounted rate. Again, I don't know if the people listening are here in Washington, D.C. And so these figures may sound expensive, but believe me, they're not for Washington, D.C. So we've got the actual tuition is down to about $30,000. It's slightly over that. It's a little over $1,000 a credit hour, and you have to have 30 credit hours to get this degree. So 5 courses of 3 credits each. I'm sorry, 10 courses of 3 credits each. So we have a discounted rate that's around a little over $1,000, $30,000 for the whole degree. In addition to that, we have, as I said, partial scholarships based on merit. We just have a fund of scholarship money, which will reduce the tuition for most students by around half further. So it would further reduce it around half. But again, it's a limited fund, and when those funds are committed, there's no more scholarship money. So if you paid for the program without a scholarship, it would cost you a little over $30,000, which may sound like a lot, but is a pretty significantly discounted cost. And if you get a scholarship, that would reduce that.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we're getting towards the end of our hour. So at this point, I guess I just want to invite you to say anything about the program that we haven't covered yet that you think is relevant.
Yeah, no, not too much. I mean, I think, again, I think that it's providential that the Second World War, which was the worst war in human history because of the scale and the immensity of the killing of innocent people, resulted in the world issuing a wonderful, not perfect, but pretty good document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's begging to be more deeply understood and articulated in our time. And the Catholic social thought, particularly that of John Paul II, really gives us the tools to do that. There's a lot of, there's a lot of things in the world that are where human rights are violated. And I think, again, going into the Easter, or going into Triduum and Easter, this is, this is just as basic as it gets. Christ died for each person, and therefore, as long as, you're called to do something, you're not all called to get a Master of Arts in Human Rights, but we're all called to respond to the suffering of other people. And if you think that you're called to be involved in public policy conversation, then I think this program will prepare you better than any other program in the country for it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so so we're gonna wrap it up because we've been going for about an hour now. But I just want to mention a couple things before we go. The first is that I guess there is the opportunity to waive when I asked the question about requirements, there's an opportunity to waive the GRE for qualified candidates.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So yeah, anybody who's thinking about doing it this year and you're wondering, do I have time to take the GRE or that kind of stuff? Yes, you can request that it be waived. So that shouldn't slow you down. I wouldn't let that slow you down. If you're ready to go and that's the only thing you're worrying about, submit your application.
Okay, excellent. And if you want to see everything in writing, then the website is mahumanrights.com. And then again, if you have additional questions, I don't know, if you think of a question while you're brushing your teeth tonight that you really wish you had asked, then you can contact Bill. So his email is Saunders, wl@cua.edu.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's it. Thank you so much, Bill,
Thank you, Jennifer.
for sharing just for sharing your story and for talking about the program. And yeah, thanks to everybody for joining us.
Yeah, everybody have a blessed Triduum.
Okay, yes, exactly. Okay, good night, everyone.